Hello, everyone. Welcome to Salted Hash. My name is Steve Reagan, senior staff writer at CSO Online. Today, we're going to be talking about some moral dilemmas when it comes to ransomware, and I'll be joined by Robert Gibbons, the CTO of Datto. I'll be right back. Stay tuned. Robert, how are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
I'm very happy to have you. This conversation you and I were having about the back ends of ransomware was very intriguing. I like it. So
yeah, the area that we get to play in a lot, and since we work with small businesses, this is the community that's hit by ransomware the worst.
Oh yeah, and I would imagine that in the SMB space, this is a very common dilemma that they come up. So let's just jump into it real quick. We've got. Here lately, healthcare has been targeted pretty bad with ransomware going forward. We've got Hancock Health, who paid $55,000 to recover their files, and then you have Allscripts, who they had an outage that lasted upwards of 6 days while they went to recover. And at that point, when the recovery was happening, they were bringing their systems back online just fine, but their customers rather had no access to any of the tools, and support wasn't giving them the answers they needed. It was a real mess.
Yep.
So when you consider your incident response plans, what is your advice to customers? When do they know whether or not they should pay a ransom when it comes to ransomware?
So whether to pay or not is really a function of a lot of prior decisions that you made before you got infected. So usually it's pretty clear when you are infected, you either have what I would call like a continuity strategy, a way to keep running, or you don't. And usually when you see big companies pay up, it's because they had a backup strategy, meaning they had the data, it was archived, they could get it back, but it would take days and days. And that's unacceptable, obviously, in healthcare context. So, the pay or not pay really comes down to what are your alternatives? And sometimes you have none, or the backup solution that you have would take too long to actually recover. And so that's when you see companies pay.
The Hancock Hospital, their CEO made a really, really important point to me. And when it came to paying the ransom, which was only $55,000, he made a comment to a reporter locally that they priced it just right. Now, before we started recording, you and I were talking about the pricing schemes. Let's circle back to that conversation. When he says they priced it just right, where do you see that conversation going? What do you think about that?
So he's referring to the ransomware developer. So
they priced it just right.
Some crook over, somewhere that came up with this software. And we run into this a lot where $55,000 would be too much for your average home user. And home users get infected a lot as well. And so ransomware, if you could consider it a business model, they've had to come up with a way to differentiate between different classes of customers. And there's a lot of techniques they use. Having hospital record software on the machine that's infected is a pretty good sign that you're going to pay a lot because you're handling private patient data. So I'm not sure about the particulars of this infection, but it's not surprising that, based on the number of machines and the data and the types of applications that we're running, that they came in at a number that was palatable, but not something every business would necessarily pay.
So when it comes to actually paying, it's a risk, isn't it? Almost like you're gambling whether or not you're going to get it back. I mean, when your customers see something that's moderately affordable to them, and they start to consider the options, like maybe this is the right way to go about it. What advice do you have for them?
So I'll say across the board, I mean, I'm obviously biased, but our customers don't face that choice because they don't have to. They never pay the ransom because they have an alternative. They can virtualize and spin up and recover to 5 minutes ago. So the types of things that people think of when they consider whether to pay. I'm sorry, your question was.
What?
Let me pause. I'll just reset.
No,
I answered something you didn't ask, I think.
No. It's all good. So we'll start back over. When it comes to paying the ransom, it's a risk, isn't it? Like you're kind of gambling at that point. So when your customers see a reason to take the the CEO at Hancock Health, to say that the ransomware author priced it just right in getting their files back versus, what they need. Now, I understand with your customers it's a little different, but by and large, what advice do you have to the SMB space when they see that reasonably priced ransom versus all the time spent to recover?
Yeah, so we've surveyed our partners on this to see how often, when the ransom is paid, do they actually not get the files back? Because remember, this is not a legitimate business. This was someone that's trying to steal from people that developed this, and you have to trust that they had enough morals to, take your money and infect your machine. But if you pay, that they'll hold up their end of the bargain. That's not exactly a sure shot. So about 3 out of 4 times people do get their files back. So it's not a horrible strategy if it's your only alternative. But 25% of the time you won't get your data back. And a lot of the more modern ransomware variants have where you'll get back less of your files over time. So if you wait a few hours, you get 90%. If you wait a few more, you'll get 80%. So we still see situations where someone's paid, but they lost some data.
Yeah, and I think those business models for the ransomware, those are the ones that you actually see on some of the forums where the criminals fight amongst themselves, because he's ruining a good thing for everybody else by saying, if you don't pay me right now, you're taking a 10% loss on recovery or a 20% loss on recovery. And the other criminals really do get angry at that point. There was one guy who had his entire source code kit leaked everywhere else. Like, they published the back end so that you can decrypt his stuff, because apparently it was really weak crypto. And they did that because what he was doing was basically a cash out scam, and people would pay the ransom, but he wouldn't recover any of the files. And so they were like, ha, no. And it's in their interest, honestly, to restore your files after you've paid, because that encourages other people to pay if they know they're going to get their files back if they pay. And earlier you and I were talking again, but this whole payment thing is why the economy is there. Earlier this year, CSO did a report where we looked at the economy of ransomware, like the criminal business model behind it. And the person I interviewed at the time, Rick from Carbon Black, he had actually made a really good point that if everybody stopped paying for ransomware, it would probably go away. It's a very fickle business model. If one half of the triangle is missing, it's all gone. And as long as people are paying, that stuff's going to still be around. And I was very interested in your take on this when you had said that, it's almost like gambling and sometimes you're going to lose. And I think that's the really big problem. Hancock Health gambled, and they won this time. They got their files back by paying that reasonably priced ransom. But then you look at the case of all of the other scientific databases that got wiped out by ransomware when their databases were left exposed to the public, and they were literally being encrypted left and right. Even if they did pay, they never got anything back. The data was just gone at that point, and that's just horrible. So looking forward, I should say, when you're going with advisories and advice to your clients, how do you tell them to prepare for ransomware?
Yeah, I think given the ubiquity of computers, everyone from the person at the front desk, into the warehouse at a business will have a computer connected to a network. Mm-hmm. It's almost impossible to completely prevent yourself from getting ever infected any computer. And so it's a response strategy in every case. I mean, there's tons of steps you can take, but the list of big businesses, medium and small, that have been infected, even with protections, is enormous. And so this is you have to plan that this is going to happen eventually. And what is your strategy, and what is your tolerance for downtime when that happens, is usually the counsel I give them. And there's a lot of businesses where the only thing they're concerned about is, I don't want to lose my data forever. It's actually an easy problem to solve, and has been solved for a long time. So tape backups are a great example. Like, if the building burns down, how do I not lose my data? But if 6 days of downtime or 1 hour of downtime is too much, and for a lot of businesses these days it is, you have to move from just worrying about, do I lose my data forever, to, can I use it continually even if something bad happens?
Yeah.
And that's a quantum leap and a change in thinking.
Yeah. So going past the hospital ransomware attack, recently Allscripts suffered a ransomware attack, and they had the complete opposite response in their IR plan. But there was a really big hiccup. And the fact was, while they had backups and they were able to restore from those backups, the process took a really long time. And after 3 days of hardcore outage on Tuesday following the previous week's attack, they said that that everything was back online, except their customers couldn't access a single thing. And in the healthcare industry, that's really bad. But when it comes to, the adage of if you have backups and you recover from your backups, you're good to go on ransomware, that just doesn't cut it these days, right? I mean, you have to have a continuity plan in place to just keep that stuff moving no matter what. What do you advise to customers on that regard?
Yeah, so this is I'll try not to make this too much about data, but this is actually the area that we specialize in, which is we certainly back up data, but also have the mechanics to at any moment bring up any of your machines that got infected and virtualize it and allow you to continue using and interacting with that machine from a backup of, say, 5 minutes ago. And so that's the second part, is you can keep running during a disaster. That's a great strategy. And then usually what you'll do is you'll wipe the infected machine, and at a time of your choosing, say in the middle of the night, you can copy back to what we call your production environment. But having access to a continuity environment and being able to plug your backup solution in with that is really the key combination that protects businesses and lets them not have to pay ransom.
So
that example.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
The example you used of they had a backup strategy, but it took them 3 or 6 days is not uncommon. Running end-to-end tests of a restore is hard because it usually requires tons of hardware, a lot of orchestration, and so IT departments don't do it at best once or twice a year, and it's usually a small part, not a full simulation. So what we do is every backup we take, we actually will boot and verify that machine can be virtualized and run. And so if you think about it, you've got, if you do hourlies all week long, you've got tens of times where you've done a mini little restore. Yeah. And when you're doing it that much, then you have confidence that if something goes wrong, I'll use it. If you've just got a solution that once or twice a year you dust off and try to do a mock recovery, that's going to happen. Yeah. You're gonna find when you actually have to use it, you're not ready.
So why do you think more organizations are doing the instant virtualized backups where you can just spin up the instance and recover right then and there, versus the hardened adage of we've got these tapes, let's restore from the tape, let's put it back up one server at a time? With virtualization being so frequent and accessible in the enterprise, why isn't that happening more often?
Yeah, so tape was an extreme example, but there's a lot of instances where a company's gone virtual, to a virtual environment, VMware, Hyper-V, or whatever. But often the recovery environment, they don't think through. So if your production environment is compromised, your primary cluster, you can't recover into that. And so they're virtual. Theoretically, they could spin it up, but they don't have the mechanics to take a backup image and actually bring it into that environment quickly and bring it up when the primary environment has been compromised. And so you'd be surprised how many people buy our physical appliance, even though they're running a VMware cluster. Because when you ask them the question, hey, if you're on VMware, what happens if that cluster fails? Oh, snap, I can't have my backups on the same thing that's running my production. For some reason, that's a learning for some companies.
That seems like a really steep learning curve if you get caught out on that one. That's a painful lesson to learn. So before we wrap this up, when it comes to the moral argument of paying ransomware, what advice do you have to people out there?
I'd say, turn to your priest or pastor. I'm not a moralist. I'm a pragmatist, and I think you should orient yourself to never have to be in that position. But when you are, there might be some cases where, pay up for your sin, because 3 out of 4 times you're probably going to get your data back. I think if that ever happens, it's indicative of you don't have an IT and continuity strategy, and that should be a wake-up call if you manage to get your data back. In fact, a lot of our partners when they bring out our solution, initially a customer will be like, that's a little too expensive. They get hit with ransomware. Hey, let's talk about that Datto thing again. Like that happens a lot these days, just because it's so prevalent right now.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for taking the time to talk with us, Robert. It was a pleasure having you on, and I hope you have a good one. For those of you that like to learn more about ransomware, feel free to look us up at csoonline.com. I'm Steve Reagan, Senior Staff Writer, and this has been Salted Hash. I'll see you next week.